fists together, I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody.
Red and yellow, brown, black, and white. We're all precious in God's sight. Everybody is somebody. Stop the violence. Save the children. Stop bullying. Save the children.
Hold your head high. Stick your chest out. You can make it. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. We do not choose to defy our government, but to seek to change its priorities, from those of war to those of peace, from the politics of military solutions to the politics of freedom. My constituency is the desperate, the damned, the disinherited, the disrespected, and the white, the Hispanic, the black, the Arab, the Jew, the woman, the Native American, the small. These three great religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, were all born in the reverent and holy city of Jerusalem. We're bound by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Rabbi Abraham Heschel, crying out from their graves for us to reach common ground. Our foreign policy must be characterized by mutual respect, not by gunboat diplomacy.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim Zogby, and I'm with the Arab American Institute, and I'm proud that we and Rainbow Push and 11 other national organizations have come together to host this summit on Gaza. I think all of us have been stunned by what we've seen unfolding since October 7th. There was no doubt that what happened on that day was horrific and caused a tremendous trauma in the Jewish community worldwide. And people reacted in varying ways, but there was a sense of vulnerability that it exposed and a sense of pain. What's happened since has caused the same vulnerability and the same pain among Palestinians, and while one evoked the pogroms, the other evoked the Nakba. The point is, for us to be real, we have to understand the pain on all sides. We also have to understand that nothing will be done until there's a ceasefire. So we've come together to call for a ceasefire. And of course there has to be accountability. People have said, shouldn't there be accountability? Of course there has to be accountability, but there has to be an end to the killing before there can be accountability. And once that happens, then we have to make hard choices. And one of which is, can we have the wealth of our nation used in the way that it's being used now? Do we need to be sending bombs that kill people when what we need is humanitarian aid and housing to give them safety and security? So we've come together around three very essential demands: a ceasefire, aid for reconstruction and humanitarian assistance, and conditioning or cutting U.S. military assistance so that we send a clear message that a new dynamic has to unfold in the Middle East. What that dynamic is and the solutions that we propose, we have lots of debate about that. But we can't have that debate while the bombs are dropping, while the raids are occurring, while kids are dying. And so we're together around those three essential demands. And I'm so proud that I'm here today with Reverend Frederick Douglass Haynes, who's the new head of Operation Rainbow Push, founded by Jesse Jackson. And we're here on Martin Luther King weekend.
That's it.
And it is remarkably appropriate that we're doing it now, because the message of nonviolence, the message of peace, and the message of putting your life on the line for peace is what this is all about. And so I'm proud, Reverend Haynes, to be with you, and I'm proud of the folks who weathered the storm to be with us, and all of you out there watching us despite our delay. Thank you for your patience. Reverend Haynes?
Yes,
it's yours.
thank you. Jim Zogby, of course, is a hero, a justice warrior, a general in the fight for freedom, and his opening remarks remind us of how valuable he is to humanity. And so I want to thank him for his leadership. I want to thank him for his longtime partnership with that icon for justice, the Reverend Jesse Louis Jackson Sr. We are here at Rainbow Push, quite appropriate. After all, Reverend Jesse Jackson, for well over 40 years, has been a global prophetic icon, understanding the need for a global consciousness, picking up, as it were, where the drum major for justice and peace, Martin Luther King Jr., left off, as in his last book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? He has a chapter on the world house and our responsibility to determine how are we going to live together as a human family in this increasingly shrinking world house. Reverend Jackson picked up that baton, and with this global consciousness has been able to stride like a colossus across the world, and always at points where there was conflict and problems, Reverend Jackson came with the solution. So I think it's appropriate that we have this conversation, this convening here at the headquarters of Rainbow Push, given the fact that looking at this historic pain there in what is called the Middle East, Reverend Jackson, a long time ago, called for security for Israel and justice for Palestinians. Of course, that was remixed in the streets of protest with the same sentiment: no justice, no peace. And we can apply that to what's happening right now. If there is no justice for Palestinians, we cannot expect to have peace and security in Israel. Justice and peace go together. And so we have come here this day and tomorrow to call for the uniting in a holy wedlock of justice and peace. Justice for Palestinians, and yes, security for Israel. And so that's why we are here at the headquarters of Rainbow Push, because of all that Reverend Jesse Jackson has done and taught us about the understanding of the partnership between justice and peace, especially applying it to what's happening in what is called the Middle East. But also, as Jim said, I think it's very important that we are having this conversation on the eve of a country that will celebrate the legacy and liberating love of the drum major for peace and justice, Martin Luther King Jr. And yet, if we're not careful, our celebration will ring hollow, if not hypocritical, if we sit on the sidelines and do not stand against the atrocity that is taking place in what is called the Middle East. And so let us not celebrate Dr. King and then go back to business as usual and ignore the pain and the plight of what has been taking place in that section of our world for decades now. So yes, we hurt with those who suffered the horror of October 7th. That was evil, it was wrong, it's painful, it's heartbreaking. But the disproportionate response to what took place October 7th, in a real sense, is inconsistent with justice, and it does not set the stage for true and lasting peace. And so, since this is the eve of the celebration of Martin Luther King Jr., I hope you'll let me remix him. Martin King said, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Here's the Freddie Haynes remix. A massacre And violence anywhere is a threat to peace and freedom everywhere. And that is why we have come on this Friday and this Saturday to discuss the fact that we are calling for security and for peace. And when we do that, I'll remix Dr. King one more time. We can say, now is the time for a ceasefire. Now is the time to strategize for a lasting peace. Now is the time to open the door for the safe passage of humanitarian aid. Now is the time to envision what peace and justice will look like in that section of the world. And now is the time where we begin to strategize, to plan for the healing and rebuilding of Gaza. If this world could come together after World War II with the Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe, we need to come together with the plan to rebuild in a just fashion the homeland of those in Gaza. And so where there is security, it will be because there is justice. And so, Reverend Jackson, thank you for your vision. Dr. King, we're going to honor you right and not just have empty platitudes where we say, I have a dream, but we're also going to stand for justice and fight for peace. And when we do that, we truly honor the legacy of Martin Luther King.
You know, Reverend Haynes, when I worked with Reverend Jackson back in the late 70s, early 80s, and he used that expression, justice for Palestinian, security for Israel, two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without the other. Right. We were outliers in the national discourse. We went to the Democratic Convention. I got to speak on a platform plank. Even our Jackson delegates weren't all with it. But we did a poll for this summit to find out where the American people are. And frankly, that message is right now where the American people are. It's not where politics is, but it's where the people are. Right. And so let me put up the poll numbers so you all can see what I'm talking about here, because we got some results, I think, that were really quite heartening. Let's look at the first poll number. If you notice, green is, are your sympathies with Palestinians, blue with Israelis, red with both, and black with neither. Notice that both dominates in every sector, except among Republicans. But among young people, 18 to 29, Palestinians 2-1. And among non-white, the numbers of Israeli-Palestinian, again, it is more Palestinian support than Israeli support, but 37 for both. Let's look now at the next on this issue of balance continuing. As a result of this current conflict, do you have sympathies with the Israelis, the Palestinians, or with both? If you look, you'll see that both trumps in every instance, or triumphs, better word, in every instance, except among young people, again, and among non-white voters, where Palestinian sympathies have gained significantly. In the next survey poll, we ask, in terms of handling the situation, how do you describe current policy toward the Middle East? 50% across the board say it supports Israel, and very few say supports Palestinians. But if you ask the next question, how do you think the Biden administration should pursue policy? Again, both. They want policy to strike a balance between the two, which is where the majority of the American people are, except again for Republicans who want to favor Israel. That's the outlier there. The next one is, which statement comes closer to your view on the next poll question? The U.S. should always side with Israel, or the U.S. should act as a fair and impartial broker? Let's go to that one. There it is. Across the board, the U.S. should be a fair and honest broker. 68% of Democrats, 66% of young voters, 63% of non-white voters. And let's understand, this presents trouble for the White House and trouble for Democrats, because young voters and people of color are the core constituents of the Democratic Party. And they're not on board anymore. You lose them and you lose. Let's go to the next one. Which statement comes closer to your view? U.S. should always provide unrestricted financial aid, financial military assistance to Israel. The U.S. should not provide unrestricted financial military aid to Israel if it continues to operate in a way which puts civilian lives at risk in Gaza. Look at those numbers. Even among Republicans, a majority are saying, do not provide it. It's a plurality of Republicans. And again, 59% of young voters and 55% of non-white voters. Now that one, the number 7. Last month, the Biden administration approved $147.5 million in weapon sales to Israel without congressional approval. Some Democratic senators objected. Who do you agree with most, President Biden or the Democratic senators who objected? Next slide up here, the one about objecting. There it is. The Democratic senators win. They even win with Republicans. They clearly win with young voters. American people aren't with this proposition. And we go to the last one, the last set here. Wait, no, there's one more on the aid issue. Let's go to that one. This is about the annual $3.8 billion in foreign military assistance to Israel. Again, every constituent group, with the exception of Republicans, support conditioning or cutting military aid. Now we have 2 final questions where we thought we'd ask voters. Let's go that one. Switch, there we go. Members of Congress have debated supporting or opposing a ceasefire in Gaza. Are you more or less inclined to support a member of Congress who supports a ceasefire? Majorities across the board, Republicans and Democrats, want more inclined to support. We asked it in the reverse way. The next one, this is it. Would you be more or less inclined to support a candidate who opposes a ceasefire? Half less inclined. And so what the takeaways from the poll are that there's a growing balance in American public opinion on this issue. Whatever sympathies Israel might have gained after October 7th, they squandered by their behaviors and continuing behaviors. There was already a shift, and the shift has now solidified into the numbers you have here. Number 1. Number 2, there is an increasing call for reducing or conditioning aid based on behavior. And finally, people want a ceasefire. And they're less inclined to support a candidate who opposes it, and they're more inclined to support a candidate who is for it. And it all I think we're at a tipping point, sir. I think it's fascinating to me. I remember Wes Michelson's with us today. He worked for Mark Hatfield, one of the early opponents of the war in Vietnam. And I remember back in '68, Pete McCloskey, who is known, people remember Pete McCloskey because he was one of the early supporters of Palestinian rights in the Congress as a Republican. But I remember Pete McCloskey because in 1968, in the height of Vietnam, he won a congressional race running against Shirley Temple. And everybody thought, oh my God, you can't beat Shirley Temple. She's an icon. Everybody loved the little darling from America. She was a Reagan-like Republican. She ran for the war. Pete McCloskey, Marine colonel, ran against the war. And he beat her. He beat her badly. And it was funny because it was like, I don't know if you all read the book, Siddhartha, Hermann Hesse's book, but there's a scene where Siddhartha's out in the woods and he sees an old sick man and he says, could that happen to me? Because his parents had sheltered him. And Pete McCloskey got to Washington and people said, oh, can this happen to me? Could I lose on this? And there was a shift. And we're seeing that beginning here. We're seeing people win because they're pro-Palestinian or pro-peace. We're seeing people lose because they take the opposite position. This is a tipping point, And the point of us involved in this movement is to continue this struggle for justice, this struggle for peace, this struggle for security that is mutual, that doesn't prioritize one group over another, but recognizes that unless there's justice for all, there's no peace for anybody. And that's, I think, the lesson of this situation we're in right now, this horrific situation we're in. And frankly, you know, when I keep saying to people, you don't build peace on the backs of 23,000 people dead. No way. The people don't say, oh, I think we'll give up now and we'll just all be nice and love Israel. No, you make more hatred with killing.
Thank you.
And I think what the American people are saying is that enough, and they want leadership that recognizes that we've seen enough. No more money for it, no more support for it. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Jim, it's very interesting. One of the statements you made earlier was that you and Reverend Jackson were outliers, 84, 88, with the prophetic, principled stances you were taking. It's very interesting that whenever you are principled and prophetic, it takes a while for the world to catch up with the truth that you've been expressing. And the results of the polling let us know that finally, it's almost as if there are those in the nation, especially a young generation and people of color, are catching up with the principled and prophetic stand that Reverend Jackson, that you and others had decades ago. And I think that's very interesting, and it's something that all of us should be aware of. As a matter of fact, it reminds me of what took place Memorial Day 2020. At the height of the pandemic, the day before Memorial Day, the attitude, the dominant attitude of many about policing and the black community was on the side of the police, and that evidently blacks were doing something wrong. But Memorial Day 2020, when Derek Chauvin was caught on camera in real time putting his knee in the neck, there's the icon for justice, Reverend Jesse Lewis Jackson Sr., that prophet without peer. Let's give it up for my big brother. Yeah, so glad to have our drum major for peace and justice, Reverend Jackson. We've been quoting you, man. Security for Israel, but not without justice for Palestine. Thank you. Let me get back to what I was saying, Reverend Jackson. Very seriously, so on Memorial Day, when Chauvin put his knee in the neck of George Floyd for over 9 minutes, in real time, the world saw the wickedness of an abusive policing system. And when the world saw it, the world rose up in rebellion because they saw real time the horrors and the hatred that was being expressed by Derek Chauvin. That happened in 2020. I'm suggesting that there's a generation now that just as what took place in 2020, real time, a generation that has been watching in real time the horrors and the atrocity taking place in Gaza, and don't miss this, in the name of a response to a horror that took place October 7th. And there's a generation, my daughter, and illustration, my daughter, and she's a millennial, and her cousins who are millennials, they sent me a thread, a group text thread that they were engaged in discussing what's taking place in the Middle East. I'll give you just a little bit of what was said. My daughter says, make it make sense. Why is it that someone is daring to say, I've got Israel's back, but they don't have the back of Palestinian children? Make it make sense. And then her cousin said, the math ain't mathin', because my tax dollars are going to funding oppression and a massacre while we claim to espouse values of democracy. And the values of democracy are being contradicted by what we are espousing in the Middle East. And that's when the response was, the math ain't mathin'. And so what the polling is revealing, there's a generation now that because they are watching in real time, inhumane, evil taking place, death, the blowing up of a hospital, are you serious? Children being maimed at best, killed at worst, are you kidding me? All of that's going on. They're watching it and receiving notifications real time, and then receiving a message. And I say this in love, where someone can go to the site of a massacre that took place in a church. Mother Emanuel AME Church. Go to that site where a massacre took place, castigate white supremacy, and not castigate white supremacy when it comes to the world platform, not castigate evil and massacres that are taking place every single day in Gaza. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. The math ain't mathin'. And so we've gathered here on the eve of the birthday of the drum major for justice and peace. And we ain't gonna have no hypocritical celebration of Martin King's birthday, because there's a young generation that is declaring, make it make sense, and the math ain't mathin'. Don't espouse democratic values and support genocide.
Thank you. Thank you, Reverend Haynes. I'm so glad to see you, Reverend Jackson. Thank you. And I gotta point out Mrs. Jackson there too, because Mrs. Jackson has been a part of this struggle for a long, long time. And I appreciate you both. I just want to say one thing about youth, because my brother wrote a book back in 2008 called The Way We'll Be. And he spoke about a generation, he didn't call them millennials, he called them the first globals. There is a consciousness young people have, he said, that is all-encompassing. They cry for places in the world that my generation didn't know existed. I would add one thing, though, that it's not, there always has been. My granddaughter, who I'm going to boast for a little bit about her, she's just brilliant. 8th grade, she wrote a paper about youth in the civil rights movement. And she said when the old generation began to fail and get tired, she called it the intrepid spark of youth would ignite them with sit-ins, would ignite them with action. And so young people, Old Testament says, the young people shall lead. And they are leading. I remember in gay rights, I mean, how many people I knew came and said, well, I never really was for that, but my kids, they made me think. And I know this I remember when Barack Obama ran, I went to 11 states to rallies and events, and people would come up to me and say, I'm not here, but I'm only here because my kids asked me to come, and pushed me to do this. And so it's even more so today because of social media, because they are seeing a reality that most of us only get from TV networks that is skewed, and newspapers that is double skewed, and the people we work with. But these kids are seeing it in real time, and it is impacting them and paining them dearly. And so I thank you, Eva, and your generation. I mean, what Jewish Voice for Peace and Students for Justice in Palestine and young folks are doing is providing a kind of a leadership that we so desperately have needed, so that we can follow you and the moral conscience that you bring to this. in a way that challenges us, because my kids call me a wuss. Because I've learned over the years, you can, well, I don't want to shake the boat, I don't want to whatever. And these kids are they're not compromising in that way. They want justice, and they don't deal with baloney. That was a polite word because we're in a,
right.
Right. They don't deal with that. So I thank you for your courage. I thank you for your vision. I thank you for allowing old folks like us the opportunity to reflect on what you've done and the reality you've helped make for us. And we're going to take a break for a minute or so and then come back with some of those voices who are going to speak to us about how we got here, Muslim voices, black voices, youth voices from the Jewish community, and others who will tell us this is where we are and this is why we're where we are. So thank you all. We'll be back in just about a minute. Thank you.
Ready on the stump? Okay, here we go. I am somebody. I am somebody. I may be poor, but I am somebody. I may be young, but I am somebody. I may be on welfare, but I am somebody. I may be small, but I am somebody. I may make a mistake, but I am somebody. My clothes are different. My face is different. My hair is different. But I am somebody. I am black, brown, white. I speak a different language, but I must be respected, protected, never rejected. I am God's child. I am somebody. Give yourself a big hand.
Push Excel's goal is to inspire students to strive for excellence in education in spite of personal, family, and community challenges that they might experience. How do we do this? By advocating for educational policies that guarantee equal funding for all students without regard to race or economic standing. By engaging parents, students, and teachers in pursuing high-quality education and striving for educational excellence at every level. And by forging partnerships with community-based and public sector stakeholders in education. Now, Push Excel is a national model program with the purpose of connecting principals, parents, popular personalities, and students in a bond and to support students at every level on the educational ladder. Now, we want you to become a member of the Rainbow Push Coalition and Push Excel. Your annual membership can help us to change policies that impact students, colleges, and universities all around the country. So step up and sign up today. Membership is only $35, and if you're a student or a senior, $15. Just go to our website, rainbowpush.org, and push join to become a member or push donate to support the Push Excel program. You can also text the word Push Excel, that's PUSHEXCEL, to 41444 on your cell phone, and you can give us any amount that you feel comfortable giving or call us at 773-256-2775. Wherever you are, you can support us as we keep pushing for you. And remember to keep hope alive.
We are saying the U.S. cannot outsource its imperial, we will not be, our loved ones in Israel and Palestine will not be the front lines of a U.S. imperial foreign policy anymore.
There's always a consequence, though, however, And we cannot forget that justice is not pretty. A lot of times when we think about justice, we think about what's going to happen on the other side of justice. But I want each and every one of you in this room, in this space, Rainbow Push space, to know, and those millions of people who are watching us all over the world, to know that justice is never a destination. It is a lifetime journey. It is never pretty. It comes with blood, with sweat, with tears, with some people losing their lives, others losing their livelihoods. But it is not a pretty place to be when you decide to challenge the status quo.
The question is, how did we get to this moment? And I actually want to start with this moment, this milestone. We are in a historic space, Rainbow Push headquarters, that started when we all needed voices who were courageous, in faith, to fight for all of us as human beings. Thank you, Reverend Jesse Jackson. We're also here in this moment where in the next few days, we will hit the 100th day milestone. 100 days of nonstop killing of children, women, and families. We will probably pass the milestone of 25,000 dead in 100 days, 15,000 of which will be children and women. This is the moment where we all say, God, help us. God, help us. Every nation on earth has said it must stop. Our nation needs to say it must stop. Our nation must say it must stop.
What we are seeing now in the Jewish community is a deep reckoning on this issue. My congregation, the congregation that I lead now at Tzedek Chicago, is an anti-Zionist congregation. And recently, our board released a statement, and it was largely addressed to the Jewish community. And the statement said that what we are seeing in Gaza right now is the logical endgame of Zionism. It did not start on October 7th. What we are seeing is the Nakba. We are seeing the ethnic cleansing of a people from their homes and their land that has been going on for decades. And we need to state that context very, very clearly. That what is going on in Gaza is, yes, a genocide, it is ethnic cleansing, it is trying to empty people out of their homes to make way for a majority Jewish nation state. And that's the thing, and it's very painful for many Jews to hear this, because so many Jews think of Zionism as the national liberation movement of the Jewish people. But its origins is in colonialism.
The scale of devastation that Israelis were experiencing and experienced on October 7th, and the fact that we were trying to organize our community against an unfolding genocide while so many people themselves were grieving loved ones, if not now staff. Our staff lost like multiple people in their families and their close friends and their kids on October 7th. And we immediately were turning around and heading into the streets to protest what we knew was going to happen to Palestinians in Gaza, and what started almost immediately after that attack.
What has happened since October 7th and the brutal atrocity of Hamas, and then the callous and cruel bombing in Gaza, has not just been the obliteration of human life and livelihood, but it's obliterated our capacity for real conversations.
Young people from Gaza Instagram living or posting videos and TikToks of what they're experiencing. And we're also seeing Israeli soldiers posting these horrifying, like gleeful videos of what the destruction that they are wreaking in real time. And there is a shattering of any semblance that this is about Jewish safety or keeping Jews safe, that the massacre and horror that's being conducted in Gaza is about our safety at all.
The mantra has been, the state of Israel has the right to defend itself, as if any one of the 193 nations of the United Nations does not have that right. And then the military actions of Israel and their consequences are justified by affirming that right and treated with moral impunity. If Palestinian rights are mentioned at all by most U.S. politicians, this typically comes as a humanitarian footnote. The right question is whether and how Israel, like any other nation, will be held accountable for its actions, both by the U.S. and the international community. And when a nation like Israel, as we have heard, is so highly dependent and continually infused with the military, financial, and diplomatic support of the United States, it is imperative that we have that discussion.
Republicans are some of the biggest supporters of Israel, who see this as extremely one-sided, and really many of them are white nationalist Christian Zionists who are hoping to outsource the Jewish problem in America to the Middle East. We hear that rhetoric echoed by our president, Joe Biden, who says Jews will never be safe in America. That's why we need Israel. Sir, you are the president of the United States of America. There are millions of Jews who live right here, and we demand to be safe where we live.
The theological issues and debates here are complex, but the most flagrant popular misuse is the claim that the establishment of the State of Israel and its continuing territorial conquests are divinely ordained, fulfilling biblical prophecy. Claims popularized in many evangelical and Pentecostal circles, in books, in novels, in movies. But listen, those claims also have been cynically manipulated by successive Israeli governmental factions in order to solidify political support of those groups here in the U.S. But God is not a real estate agent. Claiming so completely demeans and distorts the biblical witness. The prophets consistently challenged an exclusive understanding of whom God favored, linking blessing to the treatment of the foreigner, the stranger, the outsider.
Hundreds of students simultaneously walked out of class today, spanning several high schools across Chicago public schools. Free Palestine! All calling for a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas war.
Well, we're trying to get the Biden administration to really listen to the voices of Americans and really try to move to put more and more pressure on the Israeli government to step back its operations in Gaza.
At Lane Tech High School, school security was present the entire time, so the district says students could express their First Amendment rights safely. Similar crowds of students also walked out of Curry Metro High School in Archer Heights, Westinghouse High School in Humboldt Park, and at Jones College Prep in the South Loop. Those students then taking the CTA to City Hall to protest, blocking traffic at one point on Randolph.
It should have stopped a long time ago, and every day that it doesn't, every day that it continues is an atrocity, and it's a horror, and it needs to stop.
The Anti-Defamation League says student walkouts like these and other protests across the city the last several months have been rife with anti-Semitism, making Jewish students potentially feel unsafe.
This revival of the anti-war movement, the biggest revival of the anti-war movement in the United States since the war in Iraq, is being led by Palestinian, Jewish, Black, Muslim, mostly young women and queer people. We are leading this anti-war movement. And our movement is anti-genocide, it's anti-imperial, it includes Jewish liberation in a decolonial vision of what U.S. foreign policy, what the U.S. role in the world should be. And we're saying we will not be divided from each other, and how dare you tell us that our safety is pitted against each other.
can love my Jewish brothers and sisters, and I can oppose the policies of Israel and the United States. I can love my Christian brothers and sisters and oppose the policy of evangelical Christian leaders of our nation that are dividing us. Love for each other is God-given, and a hatred of wanting to be oppressed is also human nature. And everyone has the right not to be oppressed and to live free. Israelis, Palestinians, Americans, Sudanese, Yemenis, French, everyone has the right to live in freedom. And that is why faith in action makes a difference. We, as people of faith, will help solve this solution because we will refuse to allow people to divide us as people of faith. We will refuse to allow leaders who are dividers to take roles that are going to continue in the future. We will vote as people of faith who are stopping hate across our nation.
A whole lot of pearl clutching about pro-peace activists or pro-peace protesters going into Mother Emanuel Church to say ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. And I had a moment myself because it is a historic black church and most of the protesters who stood up were on the vanilla side, Dr. West. You know, and so as a black woman, I'm thinking, well, how dare they come all up into the chocolate church and try to take over? But then I surveyed the room that day, and I said, there's a whole bunch of vanilla folks in the audience because, as we know, those of you who know what I'm talking about, politicians, people like me and others, you have loyal followers, and they follow you wherever you go. So the church was very racially mixed that day. But those pro-peace activists stood up and said, ceasefire, ceasefire, ceasefire. And if they can't say ceasefire in a church, I don't know where they can say ceasefire. If we can't call for morality and justice in a church, I don't know where we can call for it. And the black church in particular, where black people, the only institution that we controlled and owned, were in the basements of those churches, plotting, planning, organizing, mobilizing, and strategizing to overturn the status quo in the United States of America on behalf of black people. So if folks can't stand up and say ceasefire in the church, I don't know where they can. You know, Jesus turned over the tables in the, hello somebody, because I come from the black liberation theology. It ain't pretty. And Jesus was a revolutionary, so I hail from that tradition where he said, well, I'm gonna quote Janet Jackson, what have you done for me lately? But he said, what you do to the least of these, you do it unto me.
Above all, we know the carnage must cease. Nothing else can happen, as Jim Zogby has said, until that happens. That's why an immediate, permanent ceasefire is our uncompromising demand. Any argument for continuing this war fails the moral test of our time. It fulfills what Hannah Arendt warned: the practice of violence, like any action, changes the world, but the most probable change is to a more violent world. And any trustworthy political solution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is essential for breaking this downward spiral that descends into hell on earth. And today, that is a matter of life and death for thousands in Gaza. And far more is urgently needed than simply delivering humanitarian aid. The international community must create the general prospect of delivering a new political future. And that centers on an expression of Palestinian sovereignty or statehood. But to make all of this possible, new conversations must take root. They must happen wherever hospitable space is provided, in synagogues, in churches, in mosques, throughout teach-ins, in colleges and universities, in labor unions, in city councils, in business roundtables, in voluntary organizations, in ecumenical groups. They should be initiated in political campaigns and enter into legislative arenas. Those conversations are beginning here, and they must flourish. As T.S. Eliot said, "For last year's words belong to last year's language, and next year's words await another voice. And to make an end is to make a beginning."
And so this is a shattering. This is a new paradigm. We are saying the U.S. cannot outsource its imperial, we will not be, our loved ones in Israel and Palestine will not be the front lines of a U.S. imperial foreign policy anymore. And we refuse to be divided, and that is what this movement for a ceasefire is. We are starting with a ceasefire, but behind this movement is an anti-imperial vision for a U.S. foreign policy that sees all of our struggles as connected, that knows we're facing climate apocalypse, billions of climate refugees in the next years and decades. We cannot be deciding who has rights by what ethnicity or religion they belong to, not here and not there. And we believe fundamentally in equality, justice, and a thriving future for all. And this movement is going to take us there. It has to. We have no choice.
High drama over this ceasefire resolution for the third city council meeting in a row. Mayor Johnson frequently having to call for order, threatening to clear the chamber if people could not be respectful as council members began debating the issue.
And this ceasefire is the path out of that violence.
Chicago, America's third largest city, should not vote to strip away President Biden's control over U.S. foreign policy.
During an impassioned speech by Deborah Silverstein, the only Jewish alderperson, the interruptions continued, and the mayor ordered the chamber cleared and the council stood in recess for nearly an hour. When the council reconvened, there were pleas on both sides to support or vote against the resolution.
The purpose of today is to let our Palestinian constituency, our siblings, know that Chicago stands with them. They matter.
I'm voting no today because of the divisive process that I was worried was disrespectful to some of the members of those communities, but also with the disrespect among colleagues.
In the end, it was the mayor breaking a 23-23 tie with his vote in favor of the resolution.
I feel very proud of Chicago because I think that our voice is really important in the national political landscape. We are a progressive city.
Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive.
People often ask, why should I vote? And to be honest, voting is a sacred right. And if it wasn't so important, then there would not have been a distinctive effort to minimize one's vote. So while the 2024 election may seem far away, it really is right around the corner. So I want to encourage you to start thinking to yourself, do I have my voter plan together? Do I know where my polling location is? Do I know who's gonna be on the ballot this election? And don't just ask this question of yourselves, but I wanna encourage you to talk to your family and friends about this as well. Because here's the thing, Voting is the one way in which you can actively participate in bringing about the change that you want to see. But to be completely honest with you, voting alone is not enough. It is so important that those of us who can and are willing to do so, that we put forth the effort to assist those in our community who might have challenges at the polls. So if you are interested in assisting others, then I would like to encourage you to participate in election protection. There are so many components to the election protection program. We have a hotline of volunteers who answer questions for those who call in, but we also have an election protection program where we have poll monitors and we have poll watchers. And this is where you can actively participate in your community and be at the polls to assist voters and to monitor what's going on at all times. If this is something that you are interested in, please reach out to us at Common Cause Illinois, where we would love to talk to you more about the program that we have. As I mentioned, it seems like the primaries are far away, but they are just around the corner. So make sure that you're prepared and that you have everything together for you to be able to vote. And the very first step that you need to take to do that is make sure that you're registered. But please be an active participant in this upcoming election, and don't just stop at voting. Try to find some of the various ways that you can get involved, whether it's election protection or other programs that might be out there. And if you yourself are a voter who runs into issues at the polls, then please be sure that around election time and during early voting that you reach out to the hotline 866-OUR-VOTE, and someone will be there to assist you.
We are sanctuary. We are a sanctuary.
When I think of Rainbow Push, I think of two words: social justice.
Education advocacy.
Political empowerment.
Freedom and equality.
Corporate partnership.
Stop the violence. Save the children.
Don't get in. Shut it down. If we don't get in, shut it down.
Political change.
Inclusion, evolution, progress, justice.
Jesse Jackson.
Keep hope. Keep hope alive. Alive. Keep hope. Keep hope alive. Alive.
We want to be bridges to end these cultural gaps.
We're going forward. By hope. Not backwards. By fear.